Hi everyone. I'm going to do my usual little checks, and then I've decided I'm also going to try and go live on Instagram at the same time. But now that's actually stressed me out a little bit. But we'll see. We'll see if that works. Let's see if I can get this working normally first. Okay, well, I got an email saying I'm live. Yeah, so why can't I see? As usual, if you are on Substack, do you want to just tell me that you can see me? Although I can't even see where it would be. I will get better at this at some point. Oh wait, here we go. It's not the most user friendly. Okay, that's not what I wanted to see. My profile. There I am. Yay. Okay. Great. Okay, now I'm also going to try and go live on Instagram, which for some reason is making me really nervous. Okay, let's see if this works. This would be amazing if it works. And so if I'm looking at that and not that, it's because I'm live on both. Hi, Instagram. I've decided to do science versus bullshit, ideally live in numerous places. So unless my laptop dies from the too much going on, which it feels like it may just have, then this will be a new thing. Maybe this will work well. Maybe not, and I'll just stick to Substack. But what I'm going to cover today, and by the way, sorry if I'm often looking here or here and not. Amelia would very much not enjoy this and probably slap me in the forehead because she says that I often look at her forehead when I'm trying to look into her eyes. But if this works, that'd be very good. So today I've had quite a lot of questions, or this week I've had quite a lot of questions. The two main ones I really want to cover, which I have had like over the last couple of weeks in numerous ways, are resistant starch, which comes around every couple of years because there's obviously a claim that you can make, or maybe not obvious, but you may have heard people make this claim that if you freeze bread and then defrost it, it has less calories in it. Or if you make some form of starchy carb like pasta, rice, oats, potato, those kind of things, and then you allow them to cool, that you form resistant starch and then less calories are absorbed. And this actually isn't a lie, like this is true. But I'm going to come on to the most important part of that, which is like, to what extent is that true and should we actually care about it? And then I've been asked quite a lot about berberine as well, which has now been coined nature's Ozempic. And all of this stuff is kind of funny because it's been around for years and years and years. And when you're as old lady in the fitness industry as I am, you've seen it all before. And it just comes in these like quite interesting cycles. And then if anyone does have any questions or things that they've seen and they're like unsure of, feel free to fire away and I will try and capture them on every single platform, which is Facebook and Instagram and Substack all at the same time if my computer doesn't die. So resistant starch, I think, is actually quite an interesting topic. Someone sent me, I think it was a reel by Stacey Sims, talking about not so much the caloric value of it actually, but that it would improve the gut microbiome. And there's also like an element of truth in this as well. So what does happen when you cook carbs and then cool them, I think she was talking about a sweet potato, is some of the carbs become, or some of the starch becomes what's known as resistant starch. And that isn't broken down, hence the name resistance, right? Makes a lot of sense. And so it does get through your small intestine and then it can essentially like feed your gut microbiome. So there is actually plausibility in that statement. The one that's massively overhyped is that you'll absorb less calories, which again is true because a lot of the calories from the resistant starch aren't absorbable calories. So you've made that food lower caloric availability. But this is the interesting part, and this is what I was looking up. And honestly, years ago, I looked this up, and I spent so long that I think Amelia actually told me to give up eventually. I couldn't find like the numbers on how much less, and it's actually really not very exciting. So it's usually about like 1 to 5% of total starch calories in the food. So if that was like a standard portion of rice, you might end up saving like 8 calories, like maybe 8 to 16 calories. If it was like a potato, you might save like 4 to 10 calories. And then the one that people talk about a lot is like freezing bread and then toasting it. And if you do that, in order just to like save calories in the bread, you save about 2 calories. So, probably not really worth thinking about if that's the only reason that you're doing it. What it can do is slightly blunt your glucose response. You could argue it might make you feel a little bit fuller. And then there is the argument that it might improve your gut microbiome. But I think with most things with gut microbiome, we just don't really know enough yet that that's going to have any kind of like significant impact. So if it makes sense for you to freeze your bread and then toast it, like fine, it'll last longer. Not a bad thing. There might even be some small benefit, but I wouldn't be doing this kind of stuff, like making a load of stuff and then like cooling it on purpose specifically to like save calories. But if that's something that you're doing anyway, like, hey, there might be a little bit of benefit. It's just always important to like, understand the magnitude of effect when it comes to these claims. So that was the first one I got sent. And then a lot of questions this week, and I don't know whether maybe there's been some ad spend behind Berberine, but apparently all over TikTok, it's like, this is nature's Ozempic. And again, like Berberine's been around for a while as a supplement. It's most interesting in states where there would be a high risk, like insulin resistance. So for example, PCOS, type 2 diabetes, obesity related conditions. I would highly doubt that you're going to get very much benefit if you are already lean, fit, and healthy. It definitely isn't nature's Ozempic to the point that it's going to reduce your appetite in anywhere near the same magnitude that Ozempic or any GLP-1 drug would. But if you, I was going to say like if you're diabetic or something, it might be useful. But even then, I'd be making sure that you're doctor first, because it can interact with certain medications that you might be taking, like metformin. So you would need to decide whether that's a good thing, and I would speak to your team about that. But yeah, it's definitely not going to have the same impact as actually taking weight loss drugs. I think we had a question here about Herbalife. Is that just like what I think of it? I'm actually I can't believe it's still around. I haven't looked at the product in a long time. I mean, the main issue with it is it's just quite a strange little like MLM scheme. I guess you could just buy protein from it, and that would be fine-ish, I guess. I haven't really looked at what the protein is. I think if you're just taking it as a meal replacement and like you're not eating real food, that's somewhat problematic. But I really thought it had died a death a little bit. Maybe it's back, along with Berberine, apparently. The other thing about Berberine that I've seen is often it's being promoted in like patch form. And I tried to look this up, but there doesn't seem to be any research that it could transdermally, i.e. through the skin, actually be absorbed to the point that it would be useful. So if you are going to take it, like I wouldn't take it in that form. I can't remember what those patches are called, because I think they were told off for calling them GLP-1 patches, because obviously there's no GLP-1 in there. But I don't know what they're called anymore, but they were kind of like had some kind of similar name. Okay, right. Next thing, my computer's really struggling. Right, okay, questions. a lot of questions about the most recent, or at least the most recent one that's been sent to me, Diary of a CEO episode, where the doctor says that you can't eat carbs after 3 p.m., that your insulin response to food massively changes later on in the evening, that you shouldn't be eating pasta, that seemingly like your whole metabolism will change as you age. Then there was also like the suggestion that it might take 8 hours for glucose levels to come back down. Fortunately, none of these things are correct. But like with most things, there's often like a little element of truth in all of them. So I thought I'd go through them. It is a bit embarrassing for a doctor to be saying this stuff. And I did think that I should have noticed that it was a red flag when she was wearing like a lab coat, which no scientist or doctor would ever wear outside of like work, and certainly not like on a random podcast. But anyway, obviously, caveat to all of this, do not get your health and fitness advice from popular podcasts. But if you are healthy, lean, fit, you certainly don't need to worry about eating after 3 p.m. I mean, even if you're not, that wouldn't be like the first thing I would be concerning myself with. You're not going to magically produce a ton more insulin because your food is eaten in the evening. But where the element of truth comes in is there is a circadian rhythm to your insulin sensitivity. So insulin sensitivity does tend to peak at about lunchtime, or about 12, depending on when you have your lunch, of course. But it does tend to peak about 12, and then it does reduce. Saying that, another large impact on insulin sensitivity is when you last exercised, or if you're exercising, right? So if you went and did a workout at like 6 p.m., you would have a big increase in insulin sensitivity because you've been working out. So it's not quite that simple. But technically, she could say, later on in the day, you don't metabolize glucose as efficiently. There is some research for that. Unlikely to make much difference if you're lean, fit, and healthy. And the impact is going to be minimal. So it might take you slightly more insulin to clear blood glucose at 9 p.m. versus like 11 a.m. in the morning. I'd argue that a lot of that is probably to do with the likelihood that you are moving more during the day, as opposed to if you ate at like 11 p.m. and then just went to bed or something. But there are multiple studies that show that when calories and protein are matched, the meal timing has very minimal impact on things like fat loss, or, well, primarily fat loss. I've learned all I needed about weight loss from you, Ben Carpenter, Jordan Sire, and James Smith. What a little team. Who would be your truth sayers for menopause? Oh, good question. One, me, if you do have any questions. Two, do you know what? There are, I think my computer's going to die too much for me to look it up, and now I can't really remember off the top of my head. But there are some very good doctors. There are some very bad doctors as well that are putting out information about this. What I will say is I've never seen anyone who's very good at like the more medical side and the exercise side. I think sometimes you need to kind of like collab what you're looking at. Like we had some really good doctors on what was the podcast we used to do? Fitness Unfiltered, talk about this. But I would say that there's like a bit of a gap in the exercise side, but that's kind of unsurprising because doctors aren't exercise specialists. So yeah, if you do have any questions, fire away. I'll be happy to answer them. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about the reason that you might want to stop eating in the evening, or I guess more to the point, the reason that a lot of people get results when they do stop doing that is got nothing to do with insulin and glucose clearance, and actually way more to do with your behaviors around food. You are much more likely to overeat in the evening. You're much more likely to snack. You're much more likely to emotionally eat. You're much more likely to overeat on highly calorie dense foods. So I don't really hear of many people like overeating on salad in the evening, but you might, open a whole packet of Share Crisps and like finish all of it, right? So it's often like boredom / mindless eating, which is much more likely in the evening, less to do with the fact that your metabolism has changed in the evening. So You don't need to worry so much about meal timing for those reasons. She also claimed that at my age, you can't be doing that like as if eating in the evening when you're older would be significantly worse and your metabolism has completely changed. Again, there is a grain of truth here. So we do see a reduction in insulin sensitivity as people age. This is much more to do with the amount that people exercise, the amount that they move, a reduction potentially in muscle mass, reduced physical activity, reduced mitochondrial function, but actually all of that is mitigated by continuing to exercise. So again, less about aging and more about like lack of activity. And then she obviously said that you couldn't eat pasta with your friends in the evening, which was very sad. But obviously, you guys are here and you know the science, so that you know that you can enjoy pasta in the evening with your friends if you want to. And like sometimes I'm like, oh, this is actually like just kind of like ridiculous information. And it's like somewhat funny. But then when you really think about it, and I know like having worked with so many people for months and months and months on their relationship with food, that then seeing a doctor on one of the biggest podcasts in the world say that you can't be eating pasta in the evening and not just be like, oh, you should probably reduce that. It was like, you cannot be doing this. It has such a negative impact on you, like proper fear mongering. That can put people back so far. And again, it might seem like a kind of like tedious thing, but actually, if that means that you miss out on like meals with your friends, meals with your family, connection, friendships, relationships, like, and you're avoiding that because you're scared of something negative happening to you, like it can really like, it's just fucking awful messaging. And then the other thing that she seemed to suggest that was pretty wild coming from a doctor was that it would take like 8 hours for glucose levels to return to baseline if you ate later at night, which is, I don't know where people like pull these random numbers from, but that's also not true. You will normally experience a rise in glucose about like 10 minutes after eating a meal. That will typically peak as your food digests and glucose comes into the bloodstream at like 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the food that you've eaten and how high the GI, like the glycemic index of that food is, but also the food that you've eaten it with. So if you've eaten it with fat, it's going to be slower to absorb. And then usually, like in a healthy person, that glucose spike will return to baseline at about 2 hours. Even if you are diabetic, you would still expect it to return to baseline in like 3 to 4 hours, for example. 8 hours would be absolutely ridiculous. And like, I don't, yeah, that is definitely not happening, even if you do eat later at night. So again, would not worry about that. Oh, lovely messages that. Let me just check what's happening on Substack. Oh, and let me find oh yeah, this was another thing I've been having a few discussions about, which is why some people can diet on higher calories. And I did a reply to this. It was essentially like, usually a couple of things are happening. One, someone genuinely can diet on higher calories, and that just simply means that they are expending more energy, right? So if you have a high total daily energy expenditure, then you could be in a deficit on higher calories. Like, it is literally that simple. Or, and this happens more and more and more now, and I get that like initially you'd be like, why would someone lie about that? Such a strange thing to lie about. And honestly, I would think the same. Like, why would you lie about how many calories that you need to consume in order to diet? But then when you see the rationale behind that and the fact that it's probably quite good marketing and you're kind of selling people like an unrealistic dream of, hey, come coach with me, I'll teach you how to lose fat on 3,000 calories a day, then you can see why people might be, promoting something that's not true or just not realistic. And as much as like there are some people who can, like women who can diet on 2,500 calories a day, the reason that they can do that is because they are expending over that amount of calories. Now, if you're being realistic with yourself and you're not, and you don't want to change your whole lifestyle so that you are, and you don't have maybe the time to exercise that much to expend that many calories, then like that approach is not realistic for you. They're not magically revamping your metabolism. Like that's just not how it works. So we actually have a pretty clear estimate of what your metabolism would be based on the factors that make up your total daily energy expenditure, which are things like the total body mass that you have. So this is why I talk about like smaller people needing to diet on lower calories. So your total body mass has a big impact. That would be your basal metabolic rate. And then within that, to a small extent, how much of that is fat and how much of that is muscle mass. And then on top of that, you would have things like your exercise activity thermogenesis, basically how many calories you expend exercising, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or how many calories you expend just kind of like living your life. A lot of people will crudely estimate this with step count. And then your thermic effect of food, which is usually just about 10% of your calorie intake. You can increase that slightly by increasing the amount of protein that you consume, but it's only going to have like a marginal impact. And so we can kind of quite accurately estimate someone's total daily energy expenditure just by looking at those things. And again, some people will suggest that if you just start to build muscle, then, you'll burn more calories. And that is also true. But the impact of that is way less than what most people think. Kind of similar to the resistant starch thing that we just spoke about, which is, unfortunately less than most would think. Okay, well, let me, I need to go because we now have the next Commit 6 intake starting call. So if you're coming over to that, I will see you in about 10 minutes, I think. And let me just get back up Substack. It's somewhat stressful being live in 3 places. I don't know if I'm going to do this again. But anyway, if you have enjoyed this, then make sure you subscribe to Substack. And if you want that, message me after this and I will send you the direct link. It is totally free. And then you'll get sent the recording. All right, okay. Have fun. Bye.